In this demo, we're going to create a standard session in Dive 365. Sessions are instances of programs. For example, if there's a defined program named Learn to Dive, a session will be each implementation of that program. And there may be many sessions for a single program. So for example, there might be 4 Learn to Dive sessions scheduled within a single week. Each session might have multiple scheduled times, so as to facilitate multiple classes per week, and each session will have its own list of participating members. And members can be associated with multiple sessions. So let's get started. Now I have Dive 365 open in my browser, and I'm signed in as a global administrator in my organization, which is called D365 Club. So what I want to do in this demo is create a standard Learn to Dive session for my fall semester that runs every Monday at 4 p.m. for an hour. So to create a session, we need to click on Semesters in the left-hand menu. Good. Now we need to choose a semester to create our session in. Now since I want to create a recreational session in my fall semester, that's the semester I'll choose. Good. So now I'm going to see a list of all the sessions in the semester. And I don't have any yet, so let's go ahead and create one. Now to do that, we can click on the Add Session button at the top of the page. Perfect. Now this opens the Create Session pop-out on the right-hand side of the screen. And this will walk us through the process of creating a session. Now there's lots of configurable aspects to a session. So it gets broken down into 4 main areas: general information, the schedule, the pricing, and restrictions. So let's start with the general information. Now first, we need to give our session a name. I'm going to call mine Learn to Dive Level 1, and then in brackets, Monday. Perfect. Now we can give our session a description. Now this description will appear in the store, so it's a good idea to explain what the session does. Now I'm going to copy and paste some text in here as an example. Good. Now if we scroll down, we can choose which program the session is associated with. Now remember that a program is something that defines what the session is all about, and in the future a program will have a curriculum, so that's a helpful way to look at it. Now I'm going to set mine to Learn to Dive. Now we can choose the registration category. Now remember that the registration categories are used for reporting and insurance purposes. So linking a session to a registration category means that when a member registers for your session, the category is automatically applied and added to their cart. So I'm going to choose the Learn to Dive Athlete category. And now that I've selected that category, we can click on the More button below that category to see what additional costs, forms, and agreements will be attached to the session when the member purchases it. Now if we keep scrolling, we'll find the Status field. Now generally when you're creating a session, it's a good idea to leave it as hidden. This will make sure that the session doesn't appear in your store while you're building it. A value of normal will make the session appear after you save, and a value of canceled means it won't appear and no one can register. So for the purposes of my demo, I'm going to switch this to normal. Alright, now we can select an image, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Good. And now we can also add some notes at the bottom. The notes appear in the welcome email after registration. So I'm going to paste some text in here for demo purposes as well. Perfect. Alright, so now let's move on to the Schedule tab. Now from the Schedule tab, we can add as many schedules as you want. Now it is important to note that these are the schedules for this one session. So when a user registers, they would be in every scheduled class. If you want members to be able to pick and choose the classes, then you'll need to create what's called a drop-in session, and that's a different demo. Now a good way to look at schedules is to consider when a session has different places to be. So for example, you might send your membership to a gymnastics facility for dryland training, and then to the pool for water time. And that can be configured as 2 schedules, but in the same session. Anyway, for this session, we only want Mondays at 4 p.m., so let's go ahead and click on Add Schedule Item. Great. Now the first thing that we can do is set the location. Now I'm going to set mine to Downtown Rec Center. Now we can set the start and end date for the schedule, and by default it's set to the whole range of the semester. Now that's good for me, so I'm going to leave it like that. And then we can set the times. So I'm going to change the start time to 4 p.m. and then we'll set the end time to 5 p.m. Good. And the time zone can stay as Pacific time in my particular case. And lastly, we can set which day of the week or days of the week because we can actually set multiple. So I could set Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and that would mean that this class would run every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And when somebody registers, they would get all 3 days as a reminder. But since I only want Monday, I'm just going to leave it as Monday. Now I can click Save. And presto, we now have a schedule. Now notice that we can now also see that this means that we're going to have 10 classes. It also says that one of them is going to be skipped. So I can click the link to see the list of classes, and this will show me all the classes that have been configured. And it shows me that one is going to be skipped because it lands on Thanksgiving, which is a day off that I created. Now we'll go ahead and close that. And the next thing that we can do is we can assign coaches to this session. But I'm going to leave this as blank. It's useful to know that any coach in your organization is going to be able to see all sessions anyways. It just means that this one isn't specifically assigned. Now we can click on the Pricing tab. Good. Now in the Pricing tab, we can select whether this is a drop-in session or a standard session. And for this demo, I'm going to keep it as a standard session. And now we can set the price. Now this is the price for the entire session. And notice that below the price, it's telling us what the price breaks down to per class. So we can change the price until we get a value that maps well to our preferred per class rate. Now I'm going to set my price to $250, which maps to about $25 per class. Great. Now the next thing that we can do is enable taxes or not. And I'm going to leave taxes turned off. Now of note, taxes are charged based on the user's actual location. So if they purchase your session and they live in BC, then they're going to pay BC taxes. Now we can choose a ledger code, if that's appropriate. This will help to group the revenue that we generate. And I'm going to choose my recreational ledger code. Now if you have discounts that you want to apply, you can choose them now. And I don't have any yet, so I'm going to leave mine as blank. Now we can scroll down. Next, we can choose whether we want to enable payment plans. If a session has payment plans turned on, then members will be able to decide whether to purchase the session outright or use one of your defined payment plans. But since this is a recreational session, I'm going to leave it off. And that brings us to proration. If we enable prorated pricing, it means that as classes complete, the price of the session will change. So for example, if you've completed 25% of the classes, then the price of the session will be 75% of the original charge if somebody were to register now. You can also set a minimum value for the prorated price so it doesn't get any lower than some value. Now prorated prices are calculated at the end of every day. So I'm going to turn on prorated pricing and I'm going to set the minimum price to $100. Good. Now let's go to the Restrictions tab. Now restrictions allow you to choose who can register for your session and when. And the first restriction is the registration window. That means that you can put your session in the store, but no one can register until the time comes. Now I'm going to leave mine as unrestricted. Now we can also choose the agreements that are specific to this session, but I'm going to rely on the agreements that are already attached to the registration category that's attached to this session. So I'm going to leave this blank. Our next restriction is required levels. Now you can imagine that we have a Learn to Dive Level 2 session that we want to create, and we want to make sure that only members that have completed Level 1 can actually register for Level 2. So with the required level restriction, we can set that level. But since this is already a Level 1 session, we don't need it, so I'm going to leave this as blank as well. And now we can choose the minimum and maximum number of spots. I'll set my minimum to 3 and my maximum to 8. Now it's important to note that a minimum doesn't prevent the session from running if it's under the minimum. It's just going to flag the session for you, and you get to decide what you want to do. The maximum, though, will prevent members from registering once the session is full. So we can enable a waitlist if we want, but I'm going to leave that off. Now we can set the allowed age, and I'm going to set mine from a minimum age of 5 to a maximum age of 13. Good. And lastly, we can apply a gender restriction, but I'm going to leave this open. And finally, we can click on the Save button at the bottom of the screen. This will go off and create the session, as well as create all of the classes based on the schedule. And now we can see that the session is listed in my semester. Perfect. So we now have a session. Now before we end, let's take a look at how this looks in a couple of different places. The first place to look is the home page. So I'm going to click on Home in the left-hand menu. And now we want to change the calendar view to a time window that includes our session. So we know that our session starts in September. So I'm going to go ahead and choose near the end of September. And we'll wait for the screen to update. And presto, we now see our session in the calendar. Awesome. Now the next place that we want to see our session is actually in the store. So let's click on the store icon in the app bar at the top of the screen. Perfect. So this has taken us to our store, and we can now see our session is listed. So that's it. Members can now register for our session. So there you have it. In this demo, we created a standard session in Dive 365.